Okay, it is 2 o'clock. We will call the Salina City Commission study session to order, and I'm going to look to my right, but I have a feeling all the discussion's coming from my left.
I think you're right about that. It is the beginning of budget season for sure. So staff's been doing a lot of work behind the scenes, getting ready. We have a lot more work to do. This will kind of be a weekly iterative process as we go along. But starting today with fund balances, revenue estimates, and capital planning. As you know, capital planning has been a big initiative in the past year, and Debbie can speak to that a little bit more in terms of the software that we've got and the effort that we've gone through. But if you haven't already looked at the capital portion of it, you're going to see considerably more detail there than we've ever had before. And that informs quite a bit of our conversations about sales tax, special sales tax in particular. So with that, I'll turn it over to Debbie, and I might have some wrap-up remarks at the end.
Okay, thank you very much. Good afternoon, Debbie Pack, Director of Finance. As Mike said, this is kind of our beginning of the budget. A couple of weeks ago, we had the outside agencies come and do their presentations, and we've included their numbers in our budgets to date. Today, we're going to go over a few things: the calendar, just some reminders of what some statutory things we have going on. As Mike mentioned, the target fund balances, some revenue estimating for the general fund, and then the capital improvement planning. So for 2024, if you want to flip to, Scott, the statutory dates for 2024, and these are typical for every single year, it's the same. We do not get valuation notices from the county until June 15th, so it makes it a little difficult for us to make any determinations on what the property tax revenues are going to be. However, with the revenue neutral rate situation that went into effect a couple years ago, we know that we will either stay with the revenue that we levied in 2023, or we could go over that revenue neutral rate based on your decisions and gather some additional revenue. At this point, we are not budgeting to go over. We are budgeting with a revenue neutral rate, but we'll have that discussion as we go along. The next few study sessions, we'll get into a little bit deeper than that. And once we actually get those valuations, we'll come back. We'll tell you what that rate is, and then give you what the numbers really look like at that point. That decision has another statutory date, which is July 20th. We're required by July 20th to notify the county if we intend to go over that revenue neutral rate. And then if we do not do that, then we have some dates that are statutory based on that decision. August 4th would be the date we have to publish for a public hearing, which can be no later than August 15th. I think our meeting date would be the 14th. And then August 25th, we have to certify our budget after it's been adopted to the county clerk. Next slide, please. So this is really your calendar. It's a little bit busier than the first one. I kind of wanted to outline kind of where we were going with the study sessions, just so you can have an idea of what's coming next and make sure that we're covering everything that you would anticipate. As we said, we talked about what we're going to do today. Next week, we intend to talk about personnel. The expenses, some of the options and things like that, as far as what we can do as far as numbers and with raises and cost of living and merits. We'll have an initial overview of where the numbers are falling on the expenditure side. Then after we do receive the valuations I mentioned, we will talk about that revenue neutral rate and what that does to our numbers. We'll have a little bit better number by, that would be June 26th. July 3rd, after that discussion, we intend to have kind of a nearly final draft for you with all of the department budgets included in that. July 10th is kind of our deadline date for having that final discussion about the revenue neutral rate. We'll talk about CIP and sub-CIP, which we'll look at about a lot today in the capital planning. July 17th, we'll talk about issues and options, which is where you give us your decisions. That's your date to tell us, this is how we want to fund this is what we want to do with this. There's about 10 categories that we look to you for direction so that we can really prepare that final budget. And we'll also look at comprehensive fees. July 17th, we would anticipate the City Commission action to be to establish the maximum mill rate. That's a statutory deadline that we need to do to actual publish, and we'll set the public hearing date. Seems odd, but after that, we'll come back to you with the final budget, just go over kind of the details of what we've published. At the public hearing, or at the publication date, we have to publish a maximum, so we can always make decisions later to come down with numbers as far as expenditures. We can't go over those numbers, so there could be some discussion that we could have afterwards. We'll publish on August 4th. We'll have a study session on water rates. As you recall, over the last couple of years, we've been trying to push these more into the budget cycle instead of bringing those back later. So we'll talk about those water rates the first week in August. And then August 14th, we intend to hold the public hearing and adopt the budget on August the 21st. Any questions about the calendar? It may be fluid depending on our conversations. We may bring more things in or move those around, but that's kind of where we're heading at this time. So the first thing we want to look at today is target fund balance. And as you know, each year we establish a fund balance for our budgeted funds. We do this just so that it's required, one, and two, so that we can have an idea where we want to lie, so that when we're doing our budget, we kind of know where our guidelines are. So what we've provided you in these next 3 slides are very detailed long-term history of what these funds have been doing. These are all the budgeted funds. But the important thing to look at is, for example, in the general fund in 2013, we had a fund balance of $2.2 million. And you can see it didn't change a lot until we got to about 2019. And at that point, we made some very purposefully decisions that we were going to cut back on expenditures, and we were going to try to really influence that fund balance, because what we were seeing was our debt ratings. We couldn't get out of this level of debt rating because our balance stayed so stagnant. So one of the things that always came up was our fund balance. So we were trying to intentionally make decisions in that time period to lower our expenditures and try to get some grip on what our fund balance would have been. At that time, our fund balance target was $7.5 million, I think, and we weren't meeting it. And then, of course, 2020 with COVID came, we cut back so many expenses with work share. We had extremely high sales tax collections over the next few years, which has enabled us really to get our fund balance to where it is today at the end of 2022 at about $24 million. And the rest of these are the same kind of story, just giving you information about where they were year over year, kind of how the funds performed for themselves, and kind of how that compares to our target fund balance. The other one we'll look at, I won't go through every one of them unless you have specific questions, but we will go through them in detail with the graphics that come along. So the first 2 pages are really the working budgets, I would call them. So they're your arts and humanities, your sales tax, your enterprise funds, those types of funds that we're working through for operations of different budgets and things like that. So then on slide 7, this breakdown of funds is more of our pass-through or special revenue funds. So these are funds that are geared for just specific spending. So I kind of separated those out because typically they don't have a fund balance target. But they are for specific spending only. So for example, Business Improvement District is for their collection and spending of their fees. Special Parks and Recreation can only be spent on parks and recreation facilities and programming. The special alcohol funds can only be spent for those that are servicing alcohol provisions, and that is a clear pass-through. As you recall, we provide grants to area agencies to fund them with that funding, so we don't typically keep a fund balance there. Special gas tax is in this category only because it is specifically used for street maintenance and transportation type projects. So it's kind of liberal in its term of transportation, so sidewalks, trails, those types of things can all be included in the special gas tax funding. And then the last one is a neighborhood park fund that we establish ourselves that is really used to enhance neighborhood parks based on the fees that are collected within those neighborhoods. So at this point, we are not recommending any changes in the fund balances. As we go through the conversations, that may change. But at this point, we're not making those recommendations based on what we have at the time.
If I could, I think as we get through the budget conversation, there's an opportunity then to talk, and the special sales tax capital improvement conversation. And I think that's the time to double back and say, do we want to allocate any of the general fund balance to any particular items, whether that be a road project or trying to get the CIP, the amortization to smooth out so that we can balance that. The other thing that you may recall is we've made an asserted effort to dedicate the special parks and recreation funding source to playgrounds. That's been used for all sorts of things, from mowers to just odds and ends, and trying to get us into a life cycle where we can keep up with the anticipated life cycle of playgrounds. We initially approached that with an assumption of about a 10-year life on playgrounds. We've since adjusted that to a 15-year life cycle assumption, and we think we can kind of get it balanced at that point, given what we're seeing in special parks and recreation funds. So,
I will mention that on that particular fund, we have seen that as we try to do these playgrounds, if we have additional funding in there and that's in excess of what we need for that, we have used it for other things. We used it at the rodeo grounds to do some of that demolition and things over at the rodeo grounds. So we can use it for other things, but our goal is to use it for that playground replacement. So if we take a look at the general fund, that's the first graphic you've seen. And this, I put all of these in graphics because I just think it's easier to see, and it's easier to see those differences and where things are going as opposed to looking at the numbers. So as you can see from the general fund revenue expense and fund balance comparison over the last 10 years, things were pretty flat until about 2019. 2017, we had a little spike. That was the TPEC sponsorship from Great Plains. Then in 19, like I said, we made some concerted effort to reduce some of our expenditures. And then from there, we've been able to, one, capture some increased sales tax revenue, as well as take advantage of some decrease in expenses. I will say some of that expense reduction is vacancies, and we'll talk about that next week. And you'll see why those numbers kind of jive like that. Once we look at those vacancy trends that we have. Currently, we have a target fund balance of $10 million. As of the 2022 revenue, that's 21% of the revenue. Our fiscal policy states that we should keep between 20 and 25% of the estimated net revenues in our fund balance, so we're within that range at this point. And as we go through these conversations, if we decide to make that a different number, we certainly can do so.
And I know it's hard to tell this early on in the year, but how's our sales tax numbers, and where do we really feel like, I know we have budgeted for an ending balance of $25.2 million. Are we feeling fairly comfortable with that, or?
We believe that the budgeted number that we've budgeted will come in significantly higher because
you mean the actual will come in higher than the budgeted?
Actual come in higher.
Okay.
The projections that we have today show that our sales tax will be higher than what we budgeted. However, when I took a look at the projections, the revenues are a little bit easier to project because we have some significant history on the cycle of how it's collected. So those are fairly easy unless something catastrophic happens to kind of project. On the expenditure side, it's a little bit tougher because we really, with vacancies and things like that, it's a little bit harder to project expenditures. But when I looked at those numbers earlier, I did feel like we were going to come pretty close on the expenditure side to what we had budgeted. We might be a little under in some spots and a little over in some spots, but for the most part, it looked like we were going to be pretty good. The revenues, however, looked like we're going to project higher than what we anticipated in our original budget. So we would at this point today anticipate that revenue, that fund balance, will go up in 2023 as well. And I might have those numbers later on in this presentation. If I do, I'll point them out when I get to that.
This general fund target balance, we're well over 150% above that.
Yes.
So
Yep.
Are we looking at staying at that level, or?
That's a decision for you all, and that's a decision that we can take advantage of that number as we make some of these decisions. Obviously, and Mike and I have this conversation a lot, you have to be careful when you're making decisions whether the cost whether you're using that money for a one-time expenditure to do something, pay for something, or you're using it for a long-term expenditure that's going to keep accumulating over time, because if you do that, that number goes down very quickly, as we've seen in the water and wastewater fund, as we've projected those numbers. So our goal would not be to stay at that high, no. Our goal would be to bring it down some and use it in ways that we could certainly use it to the best of our ability and the best way it is for us.
So if I can add to that a little bit, as I said earlier, I think we'll have an opportunity once we get the budget finalized to say, in light of that, then what do we want to do with that reserve balance? And then we're headed back to some of the strategic planning priorities that we set. The other thing that Debbie and I talk a lot about is, we have this tendency collectively, as we talk about the budget, to want to be conservative in our revenue estimates and conservative as well in terms of our expenditures. And whether it's inflation, whether it's economic development success, we've seen our revenue grow at rates we haven't seen previously, and then that staffing level is really hard to estimate. I think you're going to see, we can get into this in greater detail, the efforts that we've gone to try to look at our past staffing levels and project the budget going forward. And then, it seems like every year we have a conversation about, well, is there a recession around the corner? Should we be conservative in our revenue estimating? But I think with this fund balance, we have some capacity that we didn't have before. We literally were legitimately concerned about, could we weather a recession? At this point, I think the fund balance gives us an opportunity to let that play itself out and adapt more so than try to budget as if it's going to happen.
Well, and help me if I'm wrong here, correct me, but didn't we kind of also talk about, if we're going to leave our property tax at a revenue neutral, increase in salaries and that type of stuff, which makes up, 70% of our budget, is going to eat into whatever gains we have in sales tax or eat into the reserves a little bit. So we've got to kind of keep a little bit of capacity there for that also.
At least fluctuations in actual versus our estimate.
Yeah.
That's where the reserve balance could help offset that some. We talked about not knowing for sure what the pay plan would be and not knowing for sure what the impacts of COLAs and merits might be. That gives us some capacity to adapt as it plays itself out. But in all honesty, the fund balance is well above those levels. We have an opportunity to spend that down.
The way I've looked through this, it looks like in the capital improvement program, and we've got some ideas in there about addressing some historical problems that we've had that we can maybe put right now for the future that may address some of those balances.
I think you're right, and we'll get into the cash flow assumptions for the capital improvement program, but then there's some timing issues that the reserve fund could help us with, and then if there's things that we identify that we want to accelerate, then the reserve balance could be used for that as well.
Well, I guess my thought is that at some point, we need to stop collecting so much. If it's going to continue to grow by millions each year, let the people keep that.
Certainly, staff's coming at this from at least a revenue neutral assumption, but that's a policy decision the governing body is going to need to make. And then just being completely frank, the most difficult part for us is estimating what sales tax performance is going to be like in the coming years. We've had decades of no growth, 1% or less growth, and these are unprecedented times. I don't know what to tell you to expect in the coming year.
Yeah,
But having said that, I think this reserve balance gives us the opportunity to be more aggressive in terms of both assumptions about revenues, budgeting for expenditures, and knowing that we've got some capacity without the need for an increase.
I think a lot of things we've done are starting to come to fruition, and we're seeing some positive things. But again, I'd like to see several years of continued levels before we get too excited about some of that, because we could have some dips.
I think leveling is an important concept too, because when you have those adjustments up and down, they're shocking. So if we can figure out an approach to the budget that keeps things level, I think everybody's happier.
Well, I think we'll talk about that a little bit with some of the leasing and
Right. Well, and
the
then
purchasing.
when we get to some of the revenue projections, that's a conversation we want to have with you today, is what we want to assume. I haven't personally verified it, but I had someone tell me just the other day that that first year of revenue neutral where we elected to be revenue neutral, we were the only first-class city in the state that did that. I didn't have any reason to verify it, to check that at the time, and I haven't verified it since, but
Meaning the others did what?
they captured the growth. So, but we've done that as well, so we just haven't done it year after year.
So the next couple of funds that we'll look at are the debt service fund on the next slide. That big peak on that in 2021 was refunding. We didn't have extenuating expenses or revenue. It was a refunding in and a refunding out. Our target fund balance there currently is $800,000. The policy says between 10 and 15% of the annual principal and interest payments. Right now, we're at 12%, which is a good number. You can see we're a little bit over on that. There are some other items that we need to clean out of projects that could affect that number, but we anticipate that number should hover around that $1.5 million or less number in the near future.
And if I could jump in there, it kind of ties back to our prior conversation, but our financial position allows us to not have to issue as much debt potentially, as we are now able to try to tackle the CIP plan instead of debt financing a piece of fire equipment. We might actually be able to pay for it and have our debt issuances targeted more at street projects, major projects, and special assessment projects. And this has been an area that we've struggled for years. We were worried about that kind of tsunami peak of debt service, and we have found our way through that.
And going back to the earlier conversation, that fund balance in the general fund may allow us to not finance something that we would have financed, which would then enable us, because one of the other things that's mentioned in our rating calls is our level of debt financing. So it may, if we so choose to have $1 million street project that we would normally fund, we may have that capacity to fund that paying cash as opposed to having to issue bonds on something like that. But it just allows us to get that debt a little bit under control and get it out to those years where we don't have to worry about our property tax level being able to support that. Because we did have a peak like in 24, 25 where our numbers were high, and then as we paid things off, those numbers started to come down. So we'll be able to really get a better handle on that financing, I believe, as well. The next fund is Arts and Humanities Fund. It has a target fund balance of $100,000. Currently, it's at 11%. We don't have policies on the rest of these funds. The only two we do are the two that have property tax support. I will mention that this fund stays close at revenue and expenditures because it does have a transfer from the general fund. And what we've done in the last few years is, as opposed to just transferring that full amount, what we do is we only transfer the amount that's needed for them to maintain their balance. So in some years, we typically budget about $645,000. For example, in 2022, we only transferred $520,000. So we're just trying to keep them around that fund balance target of $500,000. And the rest of that just stays in the general fund and helps build that balance. The next slide, the Sales Capital Fund and the Sales Tax Economic Fund, you can see these are the same as the general fund in the exponential growth of the fund balance, especially in the Sales Tax Capital Fund, due to the increased revenues that we've been getting in sales tax over the last few years. I will say that you'll notice that the expenditures have gone up significantly, especially in 2022. Also in 2023, we have budgeted a significant expenditure, and that's because we created those reserve funds. As you recall, the Sales Tax Capital Fund is allocated into different tranches for different purposes, for parks maintenance, vehicles and equipment, streets, and some other buildings and facilities, and Kenwood Cove maintenance. And a couple of years ago, we had a whole discussion about, well, what if they don't spend it and all this. So at that point, you all decided that we should set up separate funds for those, give them their allocations. If they didn't spend it in that current year, then they had it available to spend what we intended it to be spent for in the first place. 2022 was the year we did that kind of adjustment. So that's why that expenditure number looks a lot higher than the previous years. And then in 2023, we talked about the river renewal project, and we decided that we were going to do the same thing with that, as opposed to having it sit in the sales tax capital fund where it might get used for other things. We were going to set that aside into the river renewal project. So there was a significant balance in there, about $4 million, that will be transferring into that project in 2023 and getting it out of that capital fund, so that funds that are in there are truly what is available to be spent. This has a $750,000 target. Obviously, that number is way out. We're way over that number at that time. The Sales Tax Economic Development Fund, you can see the spikes in that fund. The big spike in expenses was the Schwann's amount that we donated. We supported the Swans project. It was $600,000. And then in 2022, we, as part of the discussion of fund balances, one of your directives was to resupply this fund and put a $750,000 transfer into this fund from the general fund. So we are using that general fund balance as we have. We had a long discussion during COVID or just after COVID when the ARPA funds came out about how to allocate some of those funds. This was one of those. This was the result of one of those. We chose to take $750,000 out of the general fund balance and kind of re-support the economic development fund.
So as you may recall, by the time we make the contribution to the EDO and the SDI and the facade program, I don't know if I'm forgetting any others, that basically takes that percentage allocation that we've made and uses up about 90% of that. So any type of cash incentives in response to a particular economic development incentive project, it's unlikely that this fund balance is going to, on an ongoing basis, going to support that. We'd have to either pursue other alternatives, whether that be IRB financing or something else, or look to the general fund reserve balance to make those kind of expenditures.
In the next slide, we have TPEC. Those spikes are really from the agreement that we made with Spectra, where they would put in $375,000 for capital spending. So we have an increase in revenue, and then the next year in 2023, you'll see an increase in expenditures because most of that was done in 2023. The sanitation fund has a fund balance of $500,000. That spike in expenses was the carts when they chose to pay cash for those carts for the new trucks. The next fund on the next slide is the solid waste fund. Has a target fund balance of $500,000. Currently, that's 15% of its expenditures. I did make a note on here because we've been talking about this for a while as well, is to get some of that money out of that operating fund and get it into a capital reserve fund. They already have a capital reserve fund, but we weren't making transfers in there like we probably should have. So in 2024, we are budgeting to transfer some funds out of there. Currently, we have it at $6 million. We'll have to see how we we'll probably budget it for that, see how we end out 2023, and then see if that's a good number or not. But we are planning on doing that in 2024.
You might explain what that reserve fund will be used for.
The reserve fund, as you recall, we have a post-closure and closure fund that has a small amount in it, and we also have a capital reserve fund. The capital reserve fund can be used for either. If for some reason the city chose to quit doing solid waste, we have to cover the cost for that site for the rest of its life, or we have to close it, and that's significant cost. We don't have to have that money in hand, but that balance does give us that ability. Also, if you recall, the cost of things at the solid waste are not cheap. We bought almost $1 million bulldozer because it caught fire this year. So that's another reason we want to have some of that funding out of that operating fund and into some capital reserve fund so that we can make sure that we have that funding available in case those things need to be replaced that we weren't preparing for. They do a really good job of preparing for those replacements in their operating fund, but in the event that something catastrophic happens or out of the usual, we would have that fund to fall back on.
And then we have to open and close individual cells as well.
Yes. And there's some things going on with gases and things like that we're anticipating that we may need some of that funding for if we have to do something in the near future. The next fund on this one is a Gulf fund. You can see this has very little wiggle room. It's very slim margin. We try to maintain this at $100,000. Right now, it's 11% of its expenditures. The there's not much to say there. It's flat. There's not a lot of margin of income for that fund.
And in the interest of full disclosure, we talk about the Gulf Fund as if it's an enterprise fund, and we talk about its balance, and then we subsidize the balance to maintain it. But there's a lot of activity, financial activity, that goes on outside of the Gulf Fund, from mowing equipment to the irrigation system. This fund balance is available on an annual basis, but as we tackle kind of the ongoing big ticket items for the Gulf Fund, the general fund is picking up most of that bill.
That's correct. And you've probably seen that in the capital planning and also in prior sub-CIPs. All of their equipment is paid out of sales tax, and the irrigation that we bonded a couple years ago is being paid out of property tax. So they don't directly support those types of items. The wastewater on the next slide, wastewater water fund, has a target fund balance of $5 million. Currently, it's 25% of its expenditures. You can see this has a large balance, and this is one we've talked about for a few years. We've been building those reserves in order to pay for the debt of the water plant that is now online. That debt's about $2 million a year. And then the wastewater plant that we're working on, that's in construction right now, that debt's going to be about $2.3 million a year. So as we see those numbers come online, what we've done in the past is we've increased fees minimally so that when we get to that point, we don't have to increase them a lot. So we would anticipate that we continue to raise those fees minimally, a couple percent, so that we can cover that debt. But we'll also see that fund balance start to drop as we take on that debt for the next 20 years.
And we're also holding back some for groundwater remediation, our share of the the showing Air Force Base cleanup.
Yes, that's true.
There's a possibility that, well, with inflation, Martha may know the numbers better than me, but we went into this with the possibility of being able to cover that with the Department of Justice settlement. We're continuing to manage to that in terms of spending their funds first. But as you know, PFAS has been a recent point of conversation. That's a treatment item that wasn't originally contemplated, and we're trying to factor that into the planning, and we'll see what prices are like when it comes time to go to the market for the actual equipment and remediation and labor. And that's the Department of Justice settlement was $67 million. So we're holding back $5 to $10 million just as our share of that potentially.
That's true. And you'll see that when we look at the water rates, we include that in as future debt just in case. But we have it out like 5 or 6 years, I think. The next fund on here is a central garage fund. While we treat it as an enterprise fund, it's really an internal service fund. You can see the margins are very small. The idea is they service and buy product and resell it to internal departments, just to be as a service to the city and the county and some other folks here in town. Its target is $100,000, which is currently about 6% of their total expenses, their total annual expenses. On the next slide is the work comp fund. As you recall, in the past couple of years, we adopted policies around the work comp fund and the health fund, because we were trying to contemplate what do we do if these funds build up too much funding. How do we determine what we should have in there? Because these are very complicated funds. They're funds that are going to have they have premiums, but they also have cases brought that could be devastating to the fund. So we're trying to make sure that we hold enough, but we don't hold too much, and how do we balance that? So we worked with Charlesworth, and they helped us come up with a strategy to create a fund balance. And so on this one, for the work comp fund, and we were going to do that annually through April 30th, or 2024, the fund balance calculation based on the prior year's information says that our fund balance target should be a minimum of $861,509. Our fund balance at the end of 2022 was $948,000. This fund did not have direction on what to do because all of the funding from this comes from internal sources within the city. So each department out of their operating budget pays into this fund to pay for their work comp claims. We have budgeted a little bit of a reduction in what we will charge departments this year. I think $50,000 overall, so it's not a huge number. Typically, it's $250,000 to $300,000 in aggregate from all funds, so this fund doesn't see a lot of money coming in and out, but we are going to make that slight adjustment just to make sure that that fund balance stays around that target of 861.
And as I'm sure you're aware, but for those listening at home, both work comp and health insurance were self-insured, and so we have a direct financial exposure for those claims, which is why the fund balance is so important. We do carry stop loss for major claims if they hit a certain amount. In the case of work comp, we have some things that are dictated to us in terms of police in particular, in terms of coverage rates. But the thing that we pay close attention to is our experience history and that risk exposure, which is, experience is a good indicator, but all it takes is some unforeseen injury or expense that can really throw that balance off, which is why we, number one, had the policy, developed the policy to figure out what our target fund balance should be, and then obviously that's why we carry the fund balance as well.
But at this point, staff's not recommending going to the recommended maximum balance?
Yeah, as we see the fund grow, then that's our opportunity to say, are we within range? More so on the health insurance side, we talked about a rate holiday. If we have a balance that is above that target range, then that'd be an opportunity for not only the city, but our employees to not pay in for maybe a month, and we'll get to that in a second. But we're not strategically trying to increase rates to get to that maximum. We're just trying to be within that range, but be mindful of kind of what's the top end of what we should carry both in work comp and
we've had
health
a pretty
insurance.
good, maybe there's is this the graph? It graphs pretty.
Yes.
Yeah, we haven't had a lot of
Right.
fluctuations.
Right. Right.
And we don't have any stop loss behind that or anything like we do, or do we?
Yeah, we carry some stop loss insurance. I don't know the amount, where it kicks in, but so that self-insured retention amount is part of the coverage that we had to carry. And if you remember, law enforcement changed, and that's where that 750 number came from. Was we needed to insure to that level.
Okay.
And the next slide, as Mike mentioned, is the health insurance fund. The calculations that we did based on our policy brought in a minimum fund balance of about 3.2 million and a maximum fund balance about 3.7 million. Our fund balance at the end of 2022 was 3.8 million. We are not anticipating in the 2024 budget to increase premiums costs to the city. That's the side that we would really be budgeting, nor are we on the revenue side for the fund to be anticipating increasing those, unless something happens with the premiums that we'll be seeing our bids coming in. There again, we fell above that range, but so slightly that we couldn't even find a way to give it back. I don't know if that's how you explain it.
If you turned it into a rate holiday, it wouldn't even be a full premium amount yet. We're just nominally above that. The one thing that I have talked some of your ears off about is being self-insured and being with Blue Cross Blue Shield. We are watching closely the negotiations between Blue Cross Blue Shield and Salina Regional Hospital. It's very, there's information out there because of public transparency. I've spent quite a bit of time trying to compare what Blue Cross Blue Shield's contracted rate is at Salina Regional to what it is at Stormont Vale, which is an example that Salina Regional Hospital offered up. And there are noticeable differences where Blue Cross Blue Shield pays more at Stormont Vale than they pay at Salina Regional. There's also information available of the different contracted rates here locally with Blue Cross Blue Shield, what they pay and what the other insurers pay Salina Regional. There's also information available that is their highest 347 procedures and what those rates are. And if you talk in the aggregate, the percentage increase, if Salina Regional just caught up to the Stormont Vale rates as a percentage, that could be approaching $2 million of added costs for the city of Salina. I don't think that's an accurate representation when you look at the actual procedures in question. I think that's overgeneralizing how it might apply, but it's very difficult for us to say what our experience history has been and what it might be. One thing that got my attention was it appeared that Blue Cross Blue Shield was paying comparable to the other insurance providers in Salina, very much so on the top, say, 50 procedures that show up in the frequency list. Having said that, there are individual procedures that there are noticeably significant differences. I can't tell you what our experience history has been procedure by procedure, let alone project what it might be in the future. The other thing, two other things I would tell you is, the statement was made that Blue Cross Blue Shield has balances that they could absorb this without having to increase premiums. Being self-insured, it's not a function of Blue Cross Blue Shield's fund balance and their premiums to us. They are a third-party administrator. They process all of our claims. We get the advantage of their negotiated rates wherever the service might be provided, but we actually pay the actual expense of that as a self-insured provider. So there's no absorption within Blue Cross Blue Shield's premiums that would benefit us. And then lastly, as we go forward, our plan year does at least sync up with the plan year that's being negotiated with Blue Cross Blue Shield. So there's an opportunity for us to assess how it plays out and then seek alternatives. But if Blue Cross Blue Shield is the lowest payer or at the moment, any alternative, whether it's Blue Cross Blue Shield or someone else, is going to represent a cost increase for us. I just don't know how much yet.
Because that's a January 1 date.
Right.
So obviously our budget will be done before that. So let's say there's a significant adjustment that needs to be made. How would we go in and do that after the fact?
Part of it would be out of this fund balance. Part of it could be out of the general fund balance, and long term, we can't. We'd have to make ongoing adjustments so that we balance the budget and can get this in line. I think I shared with some of you that one of the things that we tried to do is see if Blue Cross Blue Shield could take our 2022 claims history and run it as if all those procedures were performed at Stormont Vale. They initially said they would see, and I was kind of surprised. That sounded pretty complicated. It sounded like a lot of work to me, and they came back and said that's a little bit more complex than we're able to do. But I'm continuing to work with our insurance consultant to try to triangulate on how much of a cost increase we ought to be thinking about.
Applaud your effort already for trying to get a handle on where that cost might be. I mean, the system also almost sounds futile to me. The Blue Cross and Blue Shield's got all the data on everybody, and it sounds like they pay the different lords what they need to stay afloat. I guess we could talk about this all day, I guess, but question I don't understand very well is if the discussions boil down to be that the hospital goes without Blue Cross Blue Shield and we have to go out of network. What does it mean to go out of network?
Well, that's a really good question. The way that our plan is structured, it's a 50-50 co-pay on the part of the employee until they meet the deductible, whether that's individual or family deductible. And so for the employee, if you're out of network, that expense is higher and your 50% share is going to be more. At the point that they hit their stop loss, then the financial consequences are solely on us as the provider of self-insured insurance. And so I don't know that there's a whole lot of motivation for a member of the plan to be concerned about in-network or out-of-network, given our current plan structure, once they hit that stop loss. I cannot see us staying with Blue Cross Blue Shield if Salina Regional Health Center is out of the network. I mean, if you're a member of our plan and you're mindful of that cost, we're essentially telling you need to find somewhere other than Salina Regional to be treated, and that's...
Well, we and our affiliates, the school system, a number of major employers have the same self-insurance, a model like that, don't they?
Yes, the school district is self-insured with Blue Cross Blue Shield, and they're considerably more employees, more insured lives, and more expense than us. I just learned recently that Great Plains is self-insured with Blue Cross Blue Shield as well. So On its face, there does seem to be a difference between the rates that are being paid at Salina Regional and Stormont Vale. I don't have an explanation for that, nor do I have a procedure by procedure comparison that sheds a lot of light on it.
Yeah.
There are wide variations from one procedure to the next. When I talk about the frequency, the number one frequency on the data they provided is a COVID shot. So it ranges from COVID shots to bypass surgery with complications and every other complex procedure you might think of, and it just varies widely.
In your research, did you look and compare like what the city of Topeka, what kind of plan they have?
Not yet. We're trying to gather that information. I was told that
You talked a lot about Stormont Vale and
right. In all honesty, the reason I focused on Stormont Vale is Salina Regional did as well, and just that amount of analysis was a lot of time and energy. To then do it for Manhattan and Via Christi and Lawrence is doable, but just haven't tackled that yet. I was told that Lawrence Hospital and Blue Cross Blue Shield kind of went through a similar negotiation a couple years ago, trying to gather some information there of trying to find employers that were self-insured and what their experience was in terms of their premium increases or their
when do we
cost
typically hear
increases.
what the new rates are going to be? I always remember about that first week in November holding our breath to see how much is going to go up.
Yep.
Is that about when you?
Yeah, it used to be into the next year. It never syncs up with budget, and so we actually amended our plan year to the first of the year, trying to at least get our expenses synced up with our fiscal year. But it still doesn't line up with the budget very well. So and unless nothing changes between Blue Cross Blue Shield and Salina Regional, I expect there's going to be a cost increase. I just don't know how much.
And you're back to your question is what do we do once we get there? There's a couple things. One, we're talking about the health fund itself. So we certainly could see, extra expenditures that we didn't anticipate for, nor did we budget for, which would require a budget amendment. The other side is the part that the city pays on behalf of employees and the part that the employees pay that all go into that fund. So the part that the city pays comes out of all those operating accounts. So there could be some backlash and some, flow from that as far as that. If we got to the case where we had to raise those rates that were being paid in as employer contributions, then we could possibly see a budgeted amendment, just like we do with other funds at the end of the year.
And I certainly can't speak for you as the governing body, but it's not lost on me that we talk about pay raises and competitive pay rates, and then if we have to pass through a cost increase to our employees, that's like taking that back. So trying to avoid a cost increase if at all possible, trying to put it on the general fund or the city side first, and then as a last resort we might have conversations about increasing employee rates.
Do we have any sense of the timing of when those negotiations between the hospital and Blue Cross and Blue Shield might have to get concluded in order for them to set things up for the next year? I assume everybody's on
Right.
the calendar year.
My understanding from the hospital is their timeline's well in advance of ours, and I don't know a hard deadline, but I got the impression June and July was when they thought they'd have something pulled together in anticipation of the September 1 renewal between the two of them. But I don't, much like anything else that we deal with, the more complex it gets, the harder it gets to hit those initial dates.
My philosophy of taxation is that the core aspects of our mission was certainly is taking care of our employees comes from the mill levy. So a conversation like that could affect my feelings about whether we remain revenue neutral or not.
We will continue to do our best to kind of get a sense of that big picture and estimate the expense increase, but there's a lot of variables and unknowns out of our control.
Yeah. Thanks, Sugar.
So that kind of gets us through the fund balance conversation. The next thing we're going to take a look at is general fund revenue estimates and kind of where we're leaning towards. And of course, these are conversations that we want your input on as far as how we're estimating these and if it makes sense to you. So this next slide, 16, is just an overview of the general fund. It gives you kind of where the projection is, and this is where that number's coming in. I thought the projection was here. It looks like we're projecting a little over $18 million in sales tax. We had budgeted about $15.5 million for 2023. In 2024, that's one of the numbers that, as Mike had spoke about earlier, that we felt like we could be a little bit more aggressive based on the recent history of the growth in that fund. So we're estimating, or we're anticipating or recommending a budget of about $19.1 million in sales tax, which is an increase. Talked about the property tax, it's flat. Motor vehicle tax, we did increase that a little bit because we've seen historically that the county has estimated and what we've budgeted is typically a little bit low. So we've increased that number a little bit to be about 6% over what our projection is for 2023. Franchise fees are also a number that we're projecting to go up a little bit based on what we've seen historically. Not a lot over what we saw in 2022. And then we'll go into some detail on these, but this is just kind of an overview for that. So basically what we have in our current budget is a total revenue of about $52.3 million in 2024 compared to what we budgeted in 2023, about $47.3 million. But our projection is about $50.8 million in 2023 at this time, with the increase in the two revenues, especially from franchise fees and sales tax. So we'll look at a couple of the major ones here. The first one is property tax, and as I mentioned, at this point, we're budgeting for flat, and that can certainly be changed. As I mentioned earlier, we don't get that valuation until June 15th. Our early estimates are that the valuation will increase up to 8%. The revenue neutral rate will be given to us, what that rate will be on June 15th when we get the valuations. So if we're looking at that, it's about $11.7 million in the general fund. As Mike mentioned, historically, this will be our third year for revenue neutral rate. The first year we chose to stay at the revenue neutral rate, which was 30.452. That was the mill rate, that was the revenue neutral rate. And one of the reasons we did that was because changing it didn't give us, there was not a lot of growth to see. It was like $60,000 or $70,000 between that net revenue neutral rate and what we had previously had as a mill rate. Last year, you chose to adopt the same rate, which allowed us to capture the growth that we saw last year. So the rate in 2022 was also 30.452. And the revenue neutral rate that was established by the county last year was 27.931. That did allow us to capture about $1.2 million in growth off of the revenue, off the valuation growth. So like I said, we'll be talking about this a couple more times before we finalize this budget in a couple weeks. Motor vehicle tax, this is kind of gives you just a history of what we actually budgeted and what we actually saw. So as you can see, for the most part, we're budgeting, and the budget comes from an estimate provided by the county, and typically that number is a little lower than what we're actually seeing, so we're being a little bit more aggressive this year. The estimate from the county this year is about $1.3 million, and we're estimating about $1.4 million in our 2024 budget.
The thing that I look at on a lot of these is the percentage growth, and this is as good an example as any. 2020 actual it represented 10.5% growth, 2021 6, 2022 0.59, 2023 6.7. If you didn't have that outlier of 0.59 in there, you could have a lot more confidence of projecting that forward. But that goes back to our prior conversation about just generally being a little bit more aggressive, given our past track record, given our fund balance. If we miss the mark, we've got capacity to react to that.
The next couple slides are sales tax, and this by far is the most complex number to figure out because there's a lot of things that go into this, and it's hard to know what effect any one item is going to have on this. Currently, the general fund captures about 40% of the total sales tax of the city, which is 0.5 of the 1.25% of the sales tax. As you can see by this graph, the sales tax revenue, and this is just in the general fund, has been going up pretty much since we implemented, and that number didn't even change in 2017. That was the special sales tax that changed. So you can see the trend line shows that it should continue to go up. The next slide is pretty interesting because this is a month-by-month collection of general fund sales tax. And when we talked about this in 2022, we were shocked and amazed that the green line was so much higher than any previous year over the past 5 years. But if you can look at the dark blue line on the right of the green line, 2023, the numbers are higher than the green line in most cases, or pretty close. So we're still seeing that high growth of collection of sales tax. Don't know how long it'll last, don't know what's going to affect it, but at this point, we are seeing to date, through the end of May, we only have April on here, but through the end of May, we're seeing about a 5.5% increase over last year in sales tax collection, so it's still a pretty good number compared to historically. The next slide shows you the percent growth, which is interesting in itself. You can see it was pretty standard, 2-3% for years and years, and then all of a sudden 2021 exploded. We are seeing a decline, however, so went from 11.25% growth in 21 down to 9, down to 8 in 2022, and our projection in 2023 and 2024 are 6%. So I would anticipate that it goes down, but it's still going to be a growth, and that's what we have to look at, is it going to be a growth over the prior year. The next slide is franchise fees, and this is another one that's a little bit hard to get your hands wrapped around because weather is so dependent on weather for gas in the winter, the cold, and the summer, the heat for electric. We do know that the electric fees are going up. It's been through it's been on the news. It's been through the Kansas legislature that they are expecting to raise their rates approximately 9%, I believe. So we are budgeting for an increase in 2024 of 4% above our 2023 projection, just in anticipation of that 9% increase of rates for electric.
That 9% was requested. That's not been approved, though, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
I don't know that we've seen it ever completely be rejected. So you combine the fact that electricity is not the only contributor to franchise fees, and then the possibility that that gets dialed back a little bit. That's how we backed off to 4%.
Just didn't want us to be quoted saying electric
Right.
was going up 9% without, since that's.
What happened to the franchise fee when we had that gas blip where there was the big shortage and the spike in the prices that
It went
were there
up.
ways that were
Yep.
did it go
We
up?
saw an increase in franchise fees for those couple of months, that big freeze is what we call it. We did see an increase on the gas side. We saw an increase in that
And
number.
so on the flip side, if there's brownouts, cessations of electrical service in whatever way, the same thing would happen.
That's right.
Yeah, and the other thing about the gas incident was they're continuing to raise rates, or they've amortized that out over time to capture some of that. So that's kind of sustained that on an ongoing basis.
And I don't know how
more
long
than a
that's
blip.
amortized out over, but again, I don't think our gas service is nearly what some of those others were.
Yeah.
I mean, I
I
think
think
we
they
were.
did a pretty good job.
I think we were insulated a
keeping it
little more
out,
than
but-
some of them. But
Yeah, I know from the city side, we had some gas contracts in place that helped us kind of weather that, but there certainly were price spikes for individual
Yes,
customers.
Catholic Church.
Yeah.
What is the video franchise fee for?
Video is from
Cox. isn't it?
Cox. Yeah.
They just by the nature of being a cable provider versus an internet or data provider, Cox is subject to a franchise fee.
Well, we got cable up
It
here.
might be Zayo.
Oh.
I think it's a
Okay,
company
yeah, you
called
could be right.
Zayo
Yep.
is the video, and don't ask me what they do
Okay.
because I don't.
It's not going to make or break our budget.
No,
not like-
no, it's, yeah,
$7,000.
Yeah.
yeah, it's pretty
At
insignificant.
a 100% decrease, we still wouldn't notice.
The next one is EMS. It's stayed pretty flat. We are projecting a flat from 2021, our 2023 projection, and we are recommending a flat revenue for the 2024 budget. Fees and charges, it obviously goes all over the place. This is mostly parks fees and things like that. You'll see that because we were closed most of COVID, it went down. We were seeing some raise, and then our projections for 2023 show it coming down a little bit. We are projecting the 2024 budget be higher than the 2023 projection, but still a little bit lower than 2022. It's hard to tell. We did raise some rates. We raised the rates at Kenwood Cove, which is one of the largest contributors. So that one, we'll just see how it actually pans out once we have those fees all calculated and we get some more actual numbers in there. Licenses and permits, this is one that we're being pretty aggressive with, knowing that we have many home building permits coming into town next year. So we are anticipating an increase from, you see our projection is very high for 2023. That's based on actual collections so far this year. And we are anticipating keeping that number high for the 2024 budget based on the knowledge that we have a lot of housing starts that we're anticipating next year. The next section we just included just for informational because it's a large capacity or large influx into the general fund is the interfund transfers. This graphic shows you where the majority of that money is coming from, water, wastewater. We wanted to compare this to the franchise fees that we saw before. For the water and wastewater fund, it's set at about 6% of revenue, and sanitation, solid waste, it's 4%. Some of the other transfers within there besides that fee are overhead cost, administrative costs, risk management, those types of fees, computer technology, and a pilot for their properties. So those are the transfers that are coming out of those enterprise funds into the general fund. And we don't anticipate changing those at all in 2024. So that kind of gets us through the general fund revenues and all of that. We're going to really shift gears now.
Right, if we could pause for a second, the sales tax revenue is the one that I just want to double back with you. We've had conversations in the past. As we reported, we're budgeting at this point at a 6% growth rate. That's, we have a 2022 actual number, we have a 2023 projected number, and then we're projecting or budgeting 6% growth on that 2023 projected number. That's probably a little bit more aggressive than we've done in the past. But I know I've had some conversations with you individually about whether there's a recession in the offing. I think the debt ceiling might have caused some of that fear. I don't claim to be an economist and have a strong opinion about it, but I do think we've got some capacity by way of reserve fund to react if a recession comes rather than budget as if it's inevitable and we have to be prepared for it. But that's probably one of the biggest decision points on the revenue side at the moment.
And that's our biggest revenue source, so that
Right.
makes it all the more,
Well, there's the expense side too, when you consider inflation.
Yeah.
That's
right.
that's more concerning actually than the revenue to me.
Where can I find a breakdown of the sales tax? We got an overall 9.25% sales tax. 6.5 of that's the state.
Yes.
Yeah,
1.25 is the city and 1.5 is the county.
County.
What's
And
the cities?
1.25.
1.25.
And there is a breakdown of that we can provide you.
Yeah, we
that
can give it to you.
breaks it all out.
And that
Which
half
a part
cent
of the
was.
county would share and a part of the county would
Yeah,
Right.
the most complicated thing to make sense of in all that is there is a county 1%
Yes.
that the taxing entities within the county get a share of that based on their what's called property tax effort, and so it varies a little bit, but we generally get
About 60% of that, of what the county collects in their 1%.
And then a 0.5% of that county's is the jail.
Yes.
on top of the 1%. There's a 0.5 cent for the jail.
And we don't get any part of that.
And then I know the comment's been made before that the city's sales tax rate is 11.75. And if you go out to internet sources, it will show that. That is adding in the CIDs that were electively put in place in the downtown and then at the alley and Homewood Suites. So to get to the 11.75, it'll be that 9.75, 1% downtown, and 1% for a project.
9.25.
I'm sorry. Well, I may be citing it incorrectly, but to get to that 11% number, that includes the CIDs on top of that.
But you used the word electively, right?
Yeah,
So they did make
we were
that
petitioned.
decision within themselves.
Right, the property owners in the downtown petitioned for the 1% CID in the downtown, and then the individual projects, the Homewood Suites and the alley, petitioned for the 1% additional CIDs for their projects.
Yep, that's correct. Any other questions or comments? Nobody thought that 6% was too big.
That additional 1% for the store bond projects, will that drop off at some point?
Yes, I think
they
it's
have
a
a
20 or a
22-year
22-year
Yeah.
life on it, yep.
Unless the debt portion gets paid off sooner.
Yeah.
So there's a cap on them based on the,
Okay.
on the cost.
I know that's jail tax, that's exceeding their expectations,
Right.
and that should drop off sooner than
Yeah.
planned.
I
Right.
don't think it had a drop dead date, though.
The
The county's 0.5%.
Yeah, I do
for
know it's
jail.
exceeding their projections, and so I think at the point the debt's paid off, then it goes away. The downtown CID funds are subject to the development agreement, and so those are all segregated for new retail and existing retail uses, and then the others are project-specific for the alley and the Homewood Suites.
Yeah. I think that jail is a 20-year.
I don't know why I thought it was just till the debt was fully serviced. I don't remember having
I don't
that.
want to speak
Yeah.
incorrectly, but I can double-check on
89
that as well as our
million.
own CIDs.
I think it's very similar to a TIF. Once it gets paid off,
Yeah.
then it doesn't accumulate for any other purpose.
Right.
So that is the purpose. So the next topic we'll talk about is capital improvement planning. We've been talking about this for a long time. We talked about it during our strategic planning. The city did invest in some software to try to capture the data, try to do some reporting. And so we've got that software. It's called Planet Software. The departments have provided us with their best effort of a 10-year replacement improvement plan schedule. All that data was entered into the software. We're able to run out of that software reports from a 5-year report, a 6-year report, a 10-year report. I think there are probably some more you can run by funding source, by department, by type of equipment. There's a lot of information that we can get out of this software. And I did provide you on the next couple of slides. This is just a sample. These next 2 slides are samples of some of the reports that are coming out of that. This particular one, the first one is by funding source. This is all the funding sources we have currently outlined in the program. We can create whatever we wanted to create in that. We've tried to make it specific enough that they're separated by source, but not so specific that we have 400,000 of them. So we're pretty, like property tax, if it's going to be supported by property tax debt, we put those all in the same category. But you can see that in this 10-year funding, by funding source, the total of they're not requests, but the total of the planning is $292 billion over the next 10 years. And that's anywhere from a lawnmower to a capital project. So there's a lot of information in here, and that's why I wanted to provide you with the detailed reports that I provided you. I hope you got a chance to kind of look at them just to see the scope of what the departments did. They did a lot of work in trying to hone down how many lawnmowers we have, how many pieces of equipment, how much, how many pumps and things like that we have to replace over the next 10 years in order to try to put this into place. Because there's a lot of moving parts in the city, and we knew it. We just never had our hands wrapped around it. And I think this program allows us to kind of try to start getting our hands wrapped around what's really out there, what condition it's in, how old it is, and start making a plan.
I think that's massive, and it's key for the future. So I'd just say thank you to everybody for the effort that got put into that. Yeah, I was really impressed with the sub documents that you gave us about that. Is there any keys in there for inflationary situations?
There really isn't at this point, because our thought was that as inflation happens, so is the revenue along with it should be increasing. We can certainly put those in there. We have a lot of flexibility to put that information in there. But I will say this, some departments put inflationary data in there with their numbers and some did not. So if you'll see some that a tractor today is costing the same as it does in 5 years. So there's a lot of still differences in there that need to be kind of ironed out and kind of honed in. But our biggest goal was to get an inventory and an idea of where we were, at least at today's costs, to see to start making
You
that
could possibly
plan.
go in and globally to a category, apply a multiplier if you...
I don't know if we could do that, but I could probably get it done. Let's
Well,
put it
after
that
just
way.
seeing the list of what Parks and Rec has got on there,
I know.
I'd say that software is worth it.
Yeah. And so the next summary that I provided you, because a lot of this is supported by sales tax through their allocations, this funding source summary was that of sales tax supported items. So your buildings and facilities, your enterprise fleet management, your Parks and Maintenance Reserve Fund, and as you can see, that totals about $84 million over the next 10 years. So in Mike's goal, in Mike's world and his goal, this would all be flat. It'd be it'd be $8 million a year. It'd be like the flat payment plan, but we're not quite there yet.
You're all welcome to come join me.
Yes. But we're getting there. I think we have
I
the
like
ability.
the escrow. I think the mayor mentioned about escrowing. You made that analogy. It's a
Yeah,
further
in all
continuation of
honesty, the data gathering exercise was huge, and I wasn't sure we were going to get to this point by budget cycle. Staff really had to work hard to get there. We didn't know what the total number was going to be. On that prior slide, 92 million of that 292 million is in an unfunded category that we've parked off to the side, recognizing that that's probably outside the realm of what we are going to plan for. And one that a couple of you have already picked up on is there's I think an $85 million number in there for a law enforcement center. That in brainstorming mode, that's part of the conversation. When it comes time to actually get down to numbers, that quickly gets out of the realm of possibility. But I was pleasantly surprised that as big as these numbers seem, they're not out of reach. They're not. They're not. I don't think they're overstated on staff's part. These are pieces of equipment that are either going to age out or we're going to have to replace for the most part, and it also informs our conversation about the general fund and the reserve balance, because without this level of detail, we just kind of had a sense that our bills were huge and we weren't sure if we could afford them. We're now getting to a level of detail that I've told some of you, if we can get this funded and have it identified as kind of our baseline, that is going to be a financial legacy for the organization and the community. We now know where we stand. We're not playing catch-up. We're not playing whack-a-mole, as I like to refer to it, of just deal with whatever crisis has arisen. We actually can kind of settle into a plan and make informed decisions going forward.
And you may or may not have noticed that in some of these funding sources, you get to a point where it just kind of, there's a number in there. We did put in some placeholders. Obviously, equipment's much easier to inventory and project and determine. They last 10 years. You can put them in there every 10 years or every 5 years. Whereas some of the project stuff is not as easily identifiable, nor is it as easily determined when it might be. So we did put a few there, like in buildings and facilities and park maintenance. There were some placeholders put in there in the outer years that we weren't able to kind of pinpoint down. But we want to at least have an idea of where we would be normally if we were spending what we today had to spend. I'm not going to go over the detail of these reports unless you had a specific item that you wanted to look at. Some of them, I tried to be as specific as I could in the description so that people kind of knew what they were. some of the departments provided things that I didn't know what they were, so. But I think for the most part, you'll see there's a pretty good list here, and the question keeps coming up, is there anything else? Is there anything else? I'm sure there will be other things.
Well, there's
There's no way this
if
is.
we don't think we're going to have surprises at some point.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
but
Yeah,
I
and
guess
for sure.
that's the caveat we have to know, that we are going to have things that we didn't see.
Yeah,
But-
I guess my biggest one is the river still, the project. We're still showing those funds, and we continue to get asked. I'm not sure where we're at on funding all that. So that seems to be the number that still kind of sits out there to me. That's
Between our, with respect to the river, between our baseline funding that was incorporated into the 2016 sales tax, the $22 million raise grant, and then we're actively pursuing either a congressional allocation, which would be more expedient, or a Corps of Engineers funding allocation. If that third funding source falls into place, we're in the $75 million range when we had a $76 million plan. When we started into this with the 2016 sales tax, 27 million was the number, recognizing 76 million was kind of the bigger picture number. So we, by way of the RAISE grant, we're able to get started on design and get some of that bridge work designed and hopefully underway pretty soon, and then hope to know more about the congressional allocation any time now.
And we did include the RAISE grant in here as its funding source.
I saw that.
So that $22 million is in this plan, so. Any questions on that detail? So then what we did once we got this data, we thought, how does this all get funded? So what we went back to was sales tax. The sales tax allocation, slide 30, that's what we did in 2023. This is what we provided in the 2023 budget code, so we can kind of see where have we been, what have we been doing, how much have we been supporting these particular things, and do we have any capacity to do anything differently? So on slide 30, this is what we budgeted in 2023. You can see in sales tax, we budgeted a little bit over $10 million in this particular fund. We allocated across the line what we normally had. We did actually increase the allocation in 2023 because we did know that we had sales tax fund balance, so some of these had been increased. So I just wanted to provide this as a base. But then on the next slide, on slide 31, what we did was we took our projection for 2023, which is now the orange-colored numbers in here, and we're projecting now that sales tax and the sales tax capital fund is about $11.7 million based on our current collection, and it makes a huge world of difference in this fund. So what we originally anticipated, our fund balance at the end of 2022 was about $7.467 million. In the 2023 budgeted model, we anticipated that to be about $4.3 million. In the 2023 projected model, the new model, we anticipate that balance to be about $5.7 million. And so what we did was, just out of curiosity, we took these numbers out of the CIP planning, exactly like they were given to us, and said, could we fund these based on what was put in here, in this plan? And so what we found was, as we put these numbers in this table, the sales tax with the projected growth of 6% in 2024, as we've recommended a budget, and a 0.5% growth thereafter, which is what we've used always, could support this CIP plan.
At least the sales tax portion of the CIP plan.
Yes, the sales tax portion.
And the 6%'s over 2022, not over 2023's number.
No, it's over 2023.
It is over 20.
The projection for
Okay.
2023.
What was the projection 2023 over 2022?
When we budgeted it, it wasn't.
Okay.
We budgeted less in 2023, so we budgeted $10.2 million.
That's where I guess-
We actually earned $10.8 million in 2022.
Yeah, and you kind of touched on it earlier. We've had a history of looking at our most recent actual number and then projecting our budget. I think when you look at page 30, it shows a negative 5.78% growth. That's because we projected on the year prior, and the intervening year outgrew our budget projection for that subsequent
We
year.
projected
So
2% growth over the 2021 number when we budgeted 2023.
Okay.
you know,
Well, half
makes
is pretty
sense.
conservative. I
Yes.
mean, basically it's
is.
Yes.
zero.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Yeah.
So that gives us some capacity to have additional funds as expenses increase. But as Debbie said, we were able to incorporate what was shown in the CIP plan to be funded with sales tax into this sales tax model, which I wouldn't have guessed going into
and
this.
that includes this new category to me over here for fire apparatus and,
Yeah.
Yeah.
That category comes from part of the discussion we've had with the departments and the struggle of our apparatus is old. The last time we bought apparatus, we funded it through debt. We issued bonds to fund a quint. And so what the fire department did a lot of research and looked for some leasing options, and this schedule is one of the leasing options that they came up with a plan that they could replace their equipment and then have a 10-year cycle where they replaced it after 5 years, but kept it
Put
an
it in
additional
reserve.
5 years
Yep.
as a backup. And so this lease plan would enable them to replace all of their apparatus in that 10-year period and keep repeating that cycle over
So
and over.
we currently keep equipment in reserve as our backup unit, and it does get called upon to be used more frequently than I might have realized. And our backup quint is over 30 years old, and so our mechanic is having to fabricate parts because they can't get their hands on them. And so our past approach has been just piece of equipment by piece of equipment, figure out what we might be able to afford in any given year. This approach is entire fleet, entire life cycle, spread that out, finance it, and turn it into a
When you say
consistent annual
finance,
payment.
are we, before we were debt, this is using sales tax dollars, so we're not debt
Correct.
financing?
Yeah, it's not debt financed
Right.
with property tax. It is, the reason we're referring to it as leased is that then smooths out that annual cost over the life cycle of 10 years, whether that,
It was a capital lease for
yeah,
that
whether
equipment.
we
just
did
coming
it
out
through a
of the
lease
sales
program,
tax,
or we
cash
did it
flow.
through
Yes.
budget,
Yeah.
So
Yep.
they've taken their entire
Property
fleet.
tax holders very happy.
Right.
Does this incorporate the new fire station and the equipment that it might take in?
Did
Or
they
is
add
there
new
really
equipment?
much more new
The column,
building, but
yeah, the column on the end of that spreadsheet is just the equipment in their fleet. We are, trying to factor in fire station number 4, but that shows up elsewhere in
It's
the.
debt finance.
in
The
the
station
CIP.
itself is debt financed. I do not believe they added any additional equipment in this plan for that particular fire
but the
station.
prior approach was just to fix it
Right.
until you couldn't fix it anymore.
So they couldn't,
Right.
and then buy a new one.
Yep.
Right. And like I said, I've been here 6 years, and I think in that 6 years, we've bought 2 pieces of equipment. One we bought used during COVID, and then one we financed through debt financing, through property tax bonds. So. Now, I will say, these are all projections, but we're kind of, we would have to be able to modify, which we certainly could, year by year, modify what we had to do based on our actual numbers. It's no different than any other way we work. But seeing that projection and that growth, and I think the very conservative growth of 0.5% of sales tax past 2024 gives us a little comfort in knowing that things might increase, costs might increase or something like that. But it certainly gives us the next 10 years ability to look at how we're going to get our house back in order with equipment and buildings and things like that.
So one suggested way to look at the spreadsheet, and Kenwood Cove maintenance is probably as good an example as any. Previously, we were funding $68,000, and that was just a set aside that was available for whatever maintenance might come up. Then in that salmon color represents our estimating of what actual replacements we have coming forward. And you can see how it was 68, went to 150, 280, 360, then gets back in the hundreds. And then in the out years, we put in a placeholder of 250. My point is that 68,000 was never
Never gonna
enough.
do it.
We knew that the day we budgeted it. We now have hard numbers, our best guesstimates for the short run, and we have a more realistic placeholder for maintenance in the out years. If you look at each one of those columns, you can kind of see what it's been and what it's planned to be, and how much more we're able to dedicate to those categories.
Oh, I have that in tables in the next slides. Because I think that's important to know, because we weren't funding things like we should have. So the next slide, 32, it's the sales tax revenue side, and it compares what we budgeted to what we're projecting. So we budgeted, like I said, it was like 2% over the 2021 number, which ultimately was 5.78% less than what we collected in 2022. With the projection, we're looking at about an 8% increase over 2022. 2024, we're budgeting a 6% increase over 2023, and then after that, we're looking at 0.5%. Over that 15-year period that we have through 2036, and we only go through that because that's when the sales tax sunsets, it's about a $30 million increase in revenue over that 14-year period.
So back to a prior point that you made, Commissioner Ryan, as our costs increase, hopefully our performance will exceed the 0.5%, and we can kind of keep up.
Right. And then this next slide is really probably, it looks very similar to what we saw in the sales tax and the general fund. This is the sales tax capital fund, but it's the same kind of trending, whereas the numbers started going up significantly in 2022. The growth has been pretty high over the past few years. We're anticipating an 8% growth over 2023 and budgeting a 6% growth in 2024. And so the next few slides really give you a comparison of where we were budgeting before these projections and where we believe we can get in each division, in each kind of category. And they ebb and flow as they put these things into the plan. So one year looked like we're budgeting a whole lot, or we're allocating a whole lot more than we were before, and then it kind of negatives out or whatever. But for the most part, every single category is if these projections continue and we fund them at these levels, will increase their funding significantly. Kenwood Co. Vehicles and equipment, which is one that we've said for years and years we have never been able to. This model gives it about a $7 million punch in the gut, additional funding over the next 14 years. So, and we know that we've seen our fleet, so we know that it's really needed. And so each one of these has their own little categories. We did increase also in this model the hike and bike trail, because we know that's an important feature in the city. So we raised that to $75,000 in the out years. Like I said, in some of these where we didn't have out years, that's where if that growth is over 0.5%, the cost goes up. We might have some capability to go back and say we can add more funding there because the projects come in or something like that. So
building and facilities is one that concerns me, just the unknowns as it relates to the building. The Schneider Electric assessment was more of an envelope assessment, windows and HVAC units, that type of thing, and you've seen that presentation. We need to play that out a little bit more and build this into the budget. So I think that has the opportunity to, with cost savings and their model, help us move forward in certain categories of buildings and facilities, but we're still left with a lot of other things, roofs and just heaters, boilers, you name it, that are probably the biggest unknown in my estimation.
And then the last slide in this kind of shows the fund balance. So in the original budgets, we anticipated at the end of 2036 that we'd have a fund balance about $8 million. And in this projection, we're showing it's about $21 million, which leaves us a great capacity, even in that fund balance, to have some of those other costs if we have those come up. That's all I have for you. So I know Mike's excited for some direction, and if there's any other questions about any of this that we've discussed, if you have, does the model look realistic? I mean, obviously, everything we do is
Projections.
Projections, yeah. We have no crystal ball.
Yeah. So,
But we certainly have the ability to change annually. We look at this every year, just like we do with water rates. We look at the actuals, we see what it's done, and we adjust accordingly. As we've discussed, if necessary, some of those things that we've put into that model of replacement, we know a lot of those things need replaced really quickly. But once we replace them and we have new, we have some wiggle room because we're saying a lawnmower might last 5 years. We've kept them for 25 years. So maybe we have to adjust that a little bit. So I think it gives us the capability to be able to do that. And certainly be able to kind of get some of these things, a jump start on some of these replacements that we have.
yeah, and I think to follow up City Manager Scragg's comment, I guess it's a 6% increase in sales tax, if we're comfortable with that. It's probably the big thing. The good thing about that is then we dropped 0.5% every year after that. So it's,
Yeah, I agree with that completely. I mean, the decades I've been around here, I was a little skeptical, dependent on the sales tax, but we seem to be at this point in time at a better place than we've been in a generation. But not to count on that, to see the projection be able to hold up with 0.5%, that's to me that's basically zero. So with the being able to implement the other things in the model, that's exciting that we can smooth out a lot of the hiccups that we can't. Mayor COVID, we can't. Says that he realizes very poignantly that anything can happen, but it does help to smooth out our planning. So I like the presentation.
yeah, and I guess we've seen sales tax increase. I don't know how much of that would be attributed to inflation this last year also, that we might see a decrease in cost of goods that would affect that. So it's that's
Expense is the other side.
yeah, but it doesn't seem like some things have come down, but not a lot. But we're seeing, just the additional construction going on, and the sales tax on construction goods has we don't have that breakout per category, but I'm guessing that some of those categories have to be going up some.
Right. Well, and that's one thing we really didn't talk about was, we talked about it on the fee side, the building of the homes. You have all that construction coming in. I mean, with the Tony's and all those, plus all these housing units now, should help sales tax.
Yeah.
Have you made any projections? We got a lot of things going, and I feel like the housing question is coming together. Say we start gaining population, which surely at some point we're going to start rising in population. Have you ever projected that? Additional population is going to create more revenue, but it'll also create more expenses.
We haven't as part of the budget process. We've been so consistent for so long, and I hope to turn the corner on that with the housing project, but we have not built it into any of our financial assumptions yet.
I think Wichita State, we asked Wichita State to see if they could figure out for each increase in population what that increase in sales tax would be. And I don't know if they ever came back with a number, but I could certainly look and see.
Wouldn't that be a happy day? But I'm a little too conservative to put my neck out on that. Do planning on.
Yeah, and we
the
see the increase in sales tax, and some of it you look at, is it inflation? Is it our pull factors increased, or is it that our population has increased? I mean, I don't know where they get their numbers at all the time, but you look at the number of units that are being sold and they're occupied. Is our population increasing? I can't say it is or isn't, but it seems like sales tax is increasing, and that's part of the reason you do some of the tax abatements you do, is to bring people into your community, and it increases your sales tax. So,
one of the biggest things that got my attention on the cost-benefit analysis for Schwann's was the number of laborers that were going to come into the economy to build that project. And then at one point, they indicated at the point they had the tilt-up concrete walls up, they were going to have an influx of 400 laborers. And I think we certainly saw that in terms of hotel stays, but we haven't. That hasn't dropped off. It hasn't been as much of a individual spike as you might expect, and that's the thing that I'm trying to get a sense of within our economy is
But
those ebbs and flows.
we're still building now, though.
We are. Yep. We still
At
have,
some
we
point,
have construction
we're
in
going to
other
be kind of
sectors.
temporarily built out on the industrial side, maybe not on the housing.
Well,
I mean,
the
unless
econ-
these workers say, "Whoa, I'm going to move here." So,
Well, you're gonna backfill this with Beck Seed, perhaps.
Yep.
You
And,
know.
well, and both Schwann's and Great
Kubota
Plains
are
have
still-
indicated
yeah, they've got new
they're still in
projects.
expansion mode and have interest for additional phases.
I think
and-
what was the comment made out at Schwann's is this is, I think it was maybe, I don't know, one of the senators or somebody made the comment that it's unusual to be doing a ribbon cutting when they've already started on their next project, and you're just doing a ribbon cutting, so.
Yep.
You know, and another factor is, I just talked to another longtime friend this morning that we're planning on retiring here. And I think we're probably going to see a lot of that as
I agree with that, yeah.
people always want to come back
Those
home.
north and west of us,
I made the comment
moving
to quite a
into
few of
Salina.
you. We used to budget as if any downturn we'd bounce a check. At this point, we now have some financial capacity to do the planning that we're doing. And as Debbie said earlier, we're going to have to update that annually, but we've got the ability to kind of adapt and assess and we're turning a battleship, but it's not. I'm not as fearful that any individual economic driver will throw our budget into a tailspin.
Any other questions or comments for staff?
any of those the debt resolution bill of the last week, there were clawbacks mentioned. Does that touch us down?
I got
down here?
confirmation this morning that it doesn't, that the funds distributed to the states and localities are not part of that clawback. In fact, one of the things I was going to attach to my city manager's update is a summary article of the debt bill, the debt ceiling bill, and all of its impacts, but that was specifically confirmed in there.
Good to know.
Is there anything we can bring you looking forward to help you get through this process? Especially next week, we're going to be talking personnel. Are there anything that you've been thinking about that we could bring you data or anything like that that would help you?
I have a note on the sales tax for CIDs when they expire, the jail. The other thing that it might be in the back of your minds is our priorities coming out of the strategic planning. I think if we can get the budget balanced and get a sense of need for reserves for some of these CIP items, then that gives us the opportunity to double back to strategic planning and say, we've identified the ongoing expenses. Now let's talk about individual one-time expenses that you might want to prioritize.
I might like to see how budgeting is keeping up with the new pay plan, because, you know, it was implemented and these steps are going to continue to go up.
Yeah,
And
that's next week's conversation.
Yeah,
Is
and I guess
our
one of the
salary estimates
things
and-
that was asked of me to follow up Commissioner Longmines is, has our pay plan helped our hiring and at least retention? That was a question asked to me, and I had to say I don't know for sure.
Yeah, we can speak to kind of our occupancy rates or our vacancy rates in positions and speak to that a little bit. Depending on how much detail you want, we can also walk you through the analysis and the assumptions we made about personnel expenses for next year, and that really revolves around our estimates of occupancy rates, vacancy rates in different positions.
Because do we consider, again, 70% of our budget is personnel? Is that about?
Yeah,
Is that a
yeah.
fair number? I know at
Yep,
one point
a little over
I had that in my
70%.
head.
Yeah,
Yep.
between
So-
70 and 75, I think.
So next week's conversations will be
Yep.
Yeah.
important.
And we do take into consideration that pay plan because we look at what's currently occupied as a position, and what the salary currently is for that position and that whoever is in that position. So we actually look at actual data, and then we try to project from there whether it's increases of merits or costs of insurance or costs of tax or whatever. So we do certainly take that into account when we do the budget. And we can certainly look at, I will say that the projection that I came up with for 2023 salaries is pretty close to what we budgeted from last year. But I haven't compared what we budgeted as far as vacancies and how that compares to what's really happening. So I'll have to take a look at that.
The other thing I would tell you is I'm on a city manager's listserv where you pose a question and everybody on it gets it and then has an opportunity to respond. And literally this morning or over the weekend, a question got put, what are you thinking about cost of living adjustments for your employees? And that started a whole influx of email this morning of here's what we're thinking. At first glance, and again, this is at the staff level. I don't know that these are final decisions that each of their governing bodies have made, but the conversation seems to be in the 4 to 6% range for cost of living. We're also looking at what CPI indexes would be appropriate for us to take a look at, but just as a starting point of that conversation, that seems to be where other communities are at.
And we'll have a number then on what our current employment is and what our capacity or
Right.
authorized.
Yep,
number
next week it'll be, here's our assumptions about employment levels, what, with no increases whatsoever, here's what that expense is, and then we can start to have a conversation about what different COLA rates, what merit rates, what the financial impacts of those would be. I think if we get through the personnel number, then we can, and we have the revenue, then we know what's left to balance on the expenditure side.
Is it possible to project how much more productivity you can get out of additional staff as far as new programming, expanding, projects that we don't have the personnel to complete now?
Out of existing staff or on the assumption that we fill the vacancies?
If magically we were fully staffed January 1st.
What I could do, we could tell you how understaffed we are by function or division, if that's helpful. I mean, everything from street laborers to police officers to development services.
Are there any major projects that we'd like to be completing now that we have the money,
Right.
but the only reason we're not doing it is because we don't have the workers?
Well, this isn't, I doubt this is where you're headed, but the thing that we're talking about right now is locates for fiber. We are inundated with locate requests, 164 in one day, and that's not necessarily, a few feet apart. That may be an entire block. It counts as one. We're having to have active conversations with our staff and the fiber companies about, we recognize there's a turnaround time frame, but we need you to work with us.
Is there a requirement on that turnaround when you said that? Because
72 hours?
that doesn't even quite seem
What's the
fair
turnaround
to
on
us.
fiber locates?
72?
72 hours. The presumption is that we're going to get it located in 72 hours, or if they proceed and they hit one of our utilities, they're not responsible for that
Can
damage.
you borrow people from another community?
Well, there is a private contractor out there, but their turnaround time's no quicker than ours, and they're short-staffed as well.
That just doesn't seem that they can guide that ship that much. I mean, not that we should be able to say it's going to be 2 weeks
Right.
before we locate it, but there ought to be a little give and take there.
Well, that's the whole 811 system, and that turnaround time is at the state level. So we're trying to have a conversation with them saying, here's our staffing, we're doing the best we can, but we need you to work with us. And
Based on what's going on, wouldn't you think other communities are having that same issue? It seems like maybe we should, again, I don't know how much the Kansas municipalities and Topeka, how much we use them. But that almost needs to be a conversation had between them and the legislators to say,
yeah.
we need to address this.
Well, is
They have to
the,
make an application, though, don't they? Could you
Well,
size the application?
Well, part of the difficulty, and Sean and Jim Teutsch and Martha are much more involved with this than I am, but part of the difficulty is the contractors trying to plan out their work, so it's no skin off their nose. They'll overestimate the work they're going to get done, and they'll call in,
Yeah.
more locates than are necessary, and the locates expire. So if they don't get to the work, then they have to call them back in.
And you've got to go back out.
or otherwise they're at risk.
Is the locate service in Kansas Gas, I know they do their own locates, are they having the same struggle keeping up?
I believe so, yeah. I think part of the reason that the fiber companies are working with us is we're not unique. They're recognizing what we're up against, and so.
I had a guy tell me the other day, I'd like to be the one selling them the flags.
Well, and it is important to remember that the employees have been able to keep up, but they're really running ragged on the locates. And so what we're really concerned about is if, there's somebody has an accident or something like that, that's going to really stack us up because they're really kind of maxing out their capability for locates right now. And again, I want to thank them because they're doing a lot of work right now. But we've got an estimated 2-year timeline where we're still going to have a lot of locates coming in. So we're really trying to plan for that future and be able to transition to be able to handle those locates. And then if the locate numbers go down, what are we going to do? Where are we going to transition those employees to? So we want to look forward to that too.
Well, and we're running, we're going to start running into vacation time, where our staff could be short-staffed at different times.
So I don't know if that was where you intended that question to take us, but that's the most pressing thing on our minds at the moment, followed by those persistent staffing shortages of police officers, street laborers, utility workers.
Yes, some of those departments we know we need to get up to speed on, but part of the problem with like the locates is it's kind of like you don't build church for Easter Sunday. It's kind of like we don't want to go out and overhire, and then all of a sudden these places have pulled out and we're overstaffed.
My nightmare is that every 6 months a different company will want to come put wires in, and this city will turn into nothing but those little groundhog things. Build those holes in the grass. I mean,
It does seem to be a lot of activity right now, and I don't know if we'll have another vendor come into the market. There was a little bit of interest from a third vendor. Just my sense is they realize there are 2 others are ahead of them on the curve, and so we haven't heard much from them. But it's not to say that someone else couldn't come into the market and add more work volume.
Has Next Tech started on, have they been submitting locates?
I'm getting a nod from the back of the room.
Yes.
They have.
Yes, they have.
It's hard to tell who's who.
Yeah.
Somebody wearing their numbers is working on the sidewalk. I passed them several times.
And in point of fact, there was even some plans to have even more, a quicker volume by Clearwave and otherwise, and they knew that for a variety of reasons, they decided to move those crews to others, but we're still, even with that slightly reduced number of crews out, we're still struggling to keep up with the locate, so that's why we're going to have to look for a longer-term plan to be able to deal with those.
Well, those guys work hard, I'll give them that.
Yeah, they churn out a lot of distance. When we initially met with them and they said how many linear feet they wanted to do a day in a week, I didn't think that was fathomable, but I think they might be hitting their numbers.
Is that who's working on Iron Street now?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I don't know off the top of my head.
Yeah.
Well, it's kind of scary. You drive by and all you see are the guy's shoulders and his head working in this hole, and you just hope drivers are paying attention and
Yeah, they're close to the street, some of those, aren't they?
very close to the street, yeah.
There's a lot of interaction at staff level on our part on a day-to-day basis, not only just about the locates, but the work that they're doing and following up in terms of inspection. It's creating a lot of work volume.
It's kind of different that we have our hands tied so much that we can't, we don't have a lot of control over what they are allowed to do. That's kind of the part that I don't like. But
To your prior point about being overstaffed, I think it's going to be somewhere out in the future. We'll be lucky to get people hired for those positions.
Yeah.
It'll be somewhere out in the future, and we can certainly roll them into the utilities and street public works operations when the time comes.
Okay, with that, we'll be back here in about 10 minutes for the regular meeting. Okay, it is 4 o'clock, and I will call the June 5th City Commission meeting to order. I will first look at staff for confirmation that the Kansas Open Meeting Act required notice has been properly provided.
Yes.
Thank you. With that, can we have a roll call?
Mayor Hoppick.
Here?
Commissioner Davis.
Here.
Commissioner Linkowitz.
Here.
Commissioner Longbine.
Here.
Commissioner Ryan.
Here.
Thank you. Will those who are able please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, a moment of silence? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Okay, we have no awards and proclamations today. That will lead us to the consent agenda.
Item 5.1, approve the minutes of the meeting of May 22, 2023.
Does any commissioner have addition or correction to the minutes?
Mayor, I move we approve the minutes of May 22nd, 2023.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve consent agenda item 5.1. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? That passes 5-0. That will lead us to administration.
Item 6.1, award the bids for the pond demolition and soil transfer for the pond at Jerry Ivey Memorial Park to TRR Inc., DBA T&R Construction in the amount of $124,869.80, including a 10% contingency, and authorizing the city manager to execute a contract with TRR Inc. upon fulfillment of all prerequisites under the bid documents.
Mr. Hammond.
Good afternoon, Mayor Hoppick and Commissioners. Jeff Hammond, Parks and Recreation Director. Here before you today for consideration of awarding bids for the pond demolition at Jerry Ivey Memorial Park. In September, a little bit of history, September of 21, we had an engineer and landscape design firm, Water's Edge Aquatic Design, provide information at a study session from a completed community survey and their evaluation of the pond. The community survey was completed and showed different designs of the pond with estimated costs, and those were conceptual designs. Their evaluation of the pond found structural wall issues, water clarity issues, a stream that needed repair, overgrown and mature landscaping. The water clarity issues that were identified. They said that were from large geese and duck populations, algae growth, limited freshwater dilution, and debris collecting on the north end. What Water's Edge Aquatic Design was not asked to do and did not provide was an analysis and a quantification to scientifically determine why some of these issues exist. In the summer of 22, we endeavored to seek answers for the water clarity issues, the consistent blue-green algae, and the continued problems of stagnant water, shallow water depth, sediment buildup. We engaged with McClure Engineering for a water balance and water depth survey, and to quantify an imbalance, if an imbalance did exist, and provide an opinion of aquatic health and example costs to address the possible water imbalance. In September of 2022, we provided a study session to discuss the findings of the survey and the estimated costs. In summary from the report, which is in the packet provided, the summary of the report from McClure Engineering is in the report. However, I'm going to go through the summaries for the public interest. A deficit of water runoff does exist. The result is more than 20 inches of deficit from precipitation compared to evaporation within the watershed. According to the water balance calculations, 300,000 gallons of supplemental water is required from the well or other sources to offset the evaporation deficit. Over the last 25 years of the lake is filled in with approximately 2 feet of silt and decaying materials on the bottom of the lake. This is an accumulation of nutrients supporting the poor water quality. Because of that shallow nature of the lake, the sun is able to reach the bottom and warm that water to support plant growth, but also nutrient decay and increase water temperatures. The recommended minimum depth of the pond should be at least 10 feet or greater to prevent sunlight from reaching the bottom of the lake. The standard rule of thumb for lake surface area to watershed area, which is the drainage area, is 1 acre of lake surface to every 10 acres of drainage area or watershed area. Using that 10-to-1 ratio, the watershed for the Jerry Ivey Pond would need to be, the watershed for the pond would need to be about 3 times larger at 7.3 acres to maintain the 3/4 acre size of the pond. Or contrastly, if you maintain the current watershed that was discovered in the report or by McClure Engineering's report, if you maintain that current watershed, it supports a lake size of 1/4 acre, which would be 2/3 smaller than its current situation or current footprint. The opinion from McClure Engineering of the probable costs to reliably maintain a healthy ecosystem of the pond was $897,000, with a possible addition of $189,000 if the byproduct or the waste product sediment needed special treatment. Based on the conclusions from the report at that study session, the feedback that I believe you provided city staff indicated support for a project to fill in the pond, and then secondly, pursue an alternative water feature for Jerry Ivey Memorial Park. With the assistance of McClure Engineering, staff prepared specifications and drawings for a project to fill in the pond. To prepare for this proposed project, staff have pursued several in-house projects. 2022, Animal Services rehomed ducks and geese that persistently stayed at Jerry Ivey Pond. They were relocated to ponds in Topeka and Olathe through the volunteers of the animal shelter. Ducks and geese still do visit the pond in a migratory fashion. In 2022 as well, we sought an opinion or reached out to the state fisheries biologist. He declared that the fish in the pond were not a desirable species, and there was most likely invasive species inside the pond. They as a state fisheries biologist would not be willing to provide services related to relocating the fish. State fisheries biologist recommendation would be to dispose of the fish and to not relocate them due to that undesirable species and possible invasive species in the pond. For the past several weeks, a licensed wildlife trapper has been trapping turtles and relocating them to another pond, and this will continue until the pond project starts, the proposed project starts. And we will be starting very soon a project to relocate the waistline that comes from the splash pad. We're relocating that to a sanitary sewer line to the north instead of to the south to the pond. On March 20th, recently, Public Works presented quotes for transferring soil, and T&R Dirt quoted the lowest amount per cubic yard of soil for the Schwann soil. Acquisition of the Schwann soil for Public Works project is subject to sampling, testing, and the results are over a month out. Alternatively, T&R Dirt has soil available that has been tested and is suitable fill material. Based on the calculation of 6,000 cubic yards for the fill and for the volume of the pond, the cost for that soil will be $42,330. Additionally, T&R Dirt has access to topsoil for the project at a cost of $12,393. The bids for the pond demolition were advertised on April 17th and opened publicly on May 11th. There were 2 bids received from TNR Inc. or TNR Dirt or TNR Construction, and also secondly Smoky Hill Construction. TNR Inc. TNR Inc.'s bid was $58,795. Smoky Hill Construction was $141,015. With the proposed fill-in soil costs, topsoil costs, and the demolition costs, plus a 10% contingency, the total proposed project would be $124,869.80. City staff have reviewed the bids for the transfer of soils and for the demolition and recommends the bid from TNR Inc. Lastly, staff provided information in the packets relating to the possible concepts for an alternative water feature at Jerry Ivey Memorial Park and the results of the community survey for those proposed concepts. These were provided for your knowledge as to where staff was at this time regarding future planning for Jerry Ivey Park. Options for your consideration today: award the bids for Jerry Ivey Pond demolition project and soil to TRR Inc. in the amount of $124,869.50 and authorize the city manager to execute a contract with TRR Inc. Award the bids for Jerry Ivey Pond option 2, award the bids for Jerry Ivey Pond demo project and soil to TRR Inc. in the amount of $124,869.50 and authorize the city manager to execute a contract with TRR Inc. With amendments that the city commission deems appropriate. Option 3, postpone awarding the bids for the Jerry Ivey Pond demolition project and soil transfer. And 4, vote to deny awarding the bids for Jerry Ivey Pond demolition project and soil transfer. Staff recommends option 1, and I stand available for any questions that you might have.
Okay, I'll look to my left. Any
No
questions or comments?
There wasn't many details in here about the process filling it in, but they're still gonna break down the old concrete walls, and that'll be part of the fill. Is that right?
Partially, not every concrete bag would be removed, but they will be partially removed, and they will not be put into the site. They will be removed and taken away.
Okay. And does any of this include the old stream waterfall that's to the south end?
It does not include that at this time.
So, and will Parks Department be reseeding and doing the finish work?
Part of the specifications for the vendor in the documents assisted in creating by McClure Engineering included that part of their scope of work. And once they would bring in the topsoil and create an opportunity for seed to be laid by the vendor, and also some type of matting to help that seed be stabilized.
Right, yeah. Yeah, I've thought about this as I went through the packet. I think the demise of the pond, we talked a lot about the watershed, was when we built the Shilling Ditch to divert flooding that area. I think that's when it really started to lose water.
As we looked at it, it never really occurred to me till we took a hard look at it, but it's ringed by roads and curb and gutters, and so that very interior footprint is in essence is the watershed. It's much smaller than it might feel like as you are out on site.
Okay, any questions or comments from the public?
Norman Mantle, Salina. Was this new dirt tested for noxious weeds? It's a state law. So if it's got noxious weeds in it, you better not accept it, because you're going to have to use chemicals on that.
Winholt, Salina. I'm a little confused on the $124,000 that we're paying for this. Yes, the pond needs to be filled in, but it's for pond demolition and soil transfer. If I remember right, TNR already has a contract, if they're using the soil from Tony's, of $800 and some thousand to take that soil away that was given to us free. And part of that was going to Jerry Ivey Park. So are we double dipping him and paying for the soil transfer from Tony's to here, if that's the soil that's going to be used? Because you threw out a figure of $42,300 for soil. And I would take it that that would be soil they would provide if the Tony's soil didn't prove to be useful in that application. So are we double dipping?
I can answer that one.
Go ahead.
So the original intent was Schwann soil, but the timing of the Schwann soil testing would delay this project. So not double dipping, they're bringing soil from a different location. They're being paid for that. We had a soil deficit even with all the Schwann's dirt in terms of our needs for the old landfill and the current landfill. So we have need for more soil than Schwann's has. We're getting off-site soil that's already been tested for the Jerry Ivey project. So Schwann soil is not part of this project any longer.
So it's not part of this
Right.
project, because that originally said that was one of the three locations that you were going to take that soil.
Yeah, that was our intention until we found out how long it was going to take to test the Schwann soil, and we're trying to expedite this project.
Okay. So none of the $800 and some thousand is going to Jerry Ivey, then it's going to be going to elsewhere,
Correct.
like the landfill and your
And the old
other part.
landfill. Yep.
Okay, any other questions or comments? Because I think you said we're still over 30 days out on getting the soil tested, correct, in your presentation?
Yep. And that testing plan's a lot more extensive than we might have thought, just
Yeah.
in terms of core boring and getting a good cross-section of testing across that entire amount of dirt.
Okay, no other questions or comments. I'll bring it back to the commission for action.
Mayor, I move we award the bids for the Jerry Ivey Pond demolition project and soil to TRR Incorporated in the amount of $124,869.50, and authorize the city manager to execute a contract with TRR Incorporated upon fulfillment of all prerequisites under the bid documents.
Second. We have a motion and a second to award the bid for the Jerry Ivey Pond demolition project and soil to TRR Inc. in the amount of $124,869.50, and authorize the city manager execute a contract with TRR Inc. upon fulfillment of all prerequisites under the bid documents. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? That item passes 5-0. That will lead us to item 6.2.
Item 6.2, approve ordinance number 23-11154 on first reading, authorizing amendment and supplemental documents relating to taxable industrial revenue bonds, Series 2021, and authorizing certain other documents and actions in connection therewith.
Mr. Hennessy.
Sean Hennessy, Assistant City Manager. First of all, I'll just give you a little bit of background. In October of 2021, the Salina City Commission approved IRBs in the amount of up to $20 million for the Great Plains project. And this project was to convert the former lighting facility, which you see on the map up ahead, which is just south of Waterwell and to the east of 135. They started that process. The original ordinance 21-110-86 provided for a 2-year time frame for them to utilize these IRBs for sales tax abatement on the improvements. As they were going through, they've decided to significantly expand both the area and the footprint of the facility for a new large painting facility. So they have requested, and staff is recommending approval for an extension of the sales tax abatement. Originally, the sales tax abatement would have expired at the end of this year, December 31st, 2023. They are asking for a 2-year extension to December 31st of 2025. It does not change the overall amount of the original request. It just extends for an additional 2 years the time frame which they may utilize that IRB for the improvements that they're undertaking at the facility. And I believe Jamie is here, although I've got a column in front of me. Okay, so they are here to answer any other additional questions. So your options are to approve ordinance number 23-11154 on first reading, approve the ordinance with amendments as the city commission deems appropriate, postpone consideration of the ordinance to a different time and date, and direct staff to collect additional information for further consideration, vote to deny the ordinance, which would result in no extension of the time for utilization of the IRBs, or approve the ordinance on first reading and directing staff to procure additional information prior to the second reading. And I'm open to any questions that you may have about this.
Any questions for Mr. Hennessy? Would the applicant like to address the commission?
Mayor and Commissioner, thank you for allowing us time to come and talk about this today.
Even though you've been up here numerous times, name please.
Hi, Jamie Hall, Great Plains Manufacturing, 1525 East North Street, Salina. Sorry. Linda Salem, Tim Henry, our Chief Financial Officer, and I are here today. David Disberger, our President and CEO, apologizes. He's out of town today, or he would have been with us as well. As this project has evolved, the paint system has gotten incredibly complicated. And we have teams today in several different locations throughout the United States meeting with our suppliers, working out the final details. There are several companies involved throughout the United States that are involved in this. The coordination of this project is huge. We originally had planned to be able to shove this paint system into what is the high bay facility out there, and it's half of the space that we need. It's 70,000 feet, and we were sure when we started this project that we could put it in there. But as we went through it and evaluated it and determined the output that we need out of that plant, it takes another 70,000 feet. So that is what has delayed us, and we're just asking for some time to complete the project as we need to do it, to equip the plant to properly produce the paint line that we need in that facility. So that's the whole reason we're here today.
So I guess just for the public, in case they didn't catch it, there's no additional industrial revenue bond dollar amount being asked for. All we're doing today is extending the timeline 2 years.
That's right. We're asking for the timeline to be extended.
Okay, I will look to my right to see if we have any questions or comments of the applicant or city staff.
I'd just like to commend Great Plains for taking what was a world-class facility and rebuilding it into another world-class facility. So,
well, thank you. We're very proud of what's going on and the production that's coming out of there. Right now, we're having to paint everything that's coming out of there in one of our Salina locations and in one of our Abilene facilities. So there is a logistical nightmare that we will be happy to be done with as soon as we can get this finished.
do you have an idea how many jobs the paint facility will add?
Just the paint?
I do not.
I
Not just the paint. Just the whole number.
I don't have, it's significant. This thing is a chemistry set like nothing any of us have ever seen. It's very, very, very
But it'll
involved.
be interesting to see it evolve and get up and operational.
We look forward to having y'all come out and look around.
Any questions or comments from
No, I'm just happy to see the projected employment, total employment numbers when it's totally built out. That's
Yeah.
great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's hard to believe 700,000 square feet wasn't enough for you
I know,
guys, huh?
I know. You're absolutely right. Yeah. Yeah. Who'd have thought?
Who would have thought it? I know, so.
Good.
Okay, any comments or questions from the public? Okay, if not, I will bring it back to the commission for action.
Mayor, I move we approve ordinance number 2311154 on first reading.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve ordinance number 23-11154 on first reading. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? That passes 5-0. Thank you for being here today.
One
Okay.
follow-up question to staff. For a second reading, should we just hold on to these? This is,
Yeah.
oh,
Don't send all that back out.
or if we can give them back to you and you can give them back to.
With your permission, we won't have all the attachments on the second
Okay.
reading. It'll just
Yeah.
be the blue sheet and the ordinance.
Okay, thank you.
The city clerk asked me if I wanted to include that. I did not want to kill trees, but I elected so that you would have the information, but point taken, we will not kill as many trees next time.
Okay. Mr. Hall, you have your hand up?
Will the second reading be next week?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Okay, we have no development business, so that will bring us to other businesses. Or an item a commissioner would like to bring before? Okay. With that, that will lead us to Citizens Forum. This is an opportunity for anyone to come forward with an item they would like to bring before the commission. I ask that you please keep your comments to 3 minutes or less.
I don't think I gave my name last time, did I?
I don't know. Go ahead and give it to us this time, just in case you've changed it.
I can do that.
No.
Okay, Norman Salina. This has all been in the news media. Are there other cities that are having a total ban on plastics? Yes. What are one-use plastics? They are not biodegradable. Why are we getting just one-use plastic? We used to be able to buy products in bulk. So we need to look at that. What other states and cities are now rationing water? I've been to Sterling, I've been to Lyons, I've been to McPherson, I've been to Lindsborg. They're still running water off their lawns, on the sidewalk, down in the sewer. They don't understand that we have a water issue. I've talked to the man that is on the irrigation board below Canopus Reservoir. I said, don't they understand we have a shortage of water in this state? He says, they will when we run out of food. So what are we doing to address this issue about shortage of water?
Thank you.
Ben Winholt, Salina. Hope you all missed me for the last month. I haven't been around. Friday night, I was able to enjoy the radio station's Cruise and Faith for a Cause again, because this is about the only time that we're able to legally cruise Santa Fe. With that, I was driving around and decided to go check my pet peeve project, which would be the tennis courts. Of course, there was nobody there on a beautiful evening, but I did notice, and so I would like to get an update, that the main gates are now wedged open, roped open, so anybody can go in. And I've noticed that all 12 courts, there used to be evidently a device on the fences where you could go into it that have been taken off because the poles are had been damaged from where they were put on, and it's not from the lever that opens the gate. So has STA backed off on everything as far as pin numbers getting in, and they are now all accessible to the public, all 12 of them?
Yeah, that was discussed while you were gone. So the approach is now that we have staff people that lock and unlock the bathrooms. They are unlocking and unlocking the gates, propping them open. And that doesn't correspond with sunrise to sunset. So outside of that period, there is a posted PIN number on the gate. And
I saw that.
we can automatically control whether that PIN number works or not. So from sunrise until the time that the gates are propped open, that PIN code will work. And then from the time the gates are closed till the park's closed, whether that's sunset or using the lights, that PIN code will also work.
Right. And evidently, STA's site for having to have reservations for a court or anything like that is no good now because all 12 courts are accessible once you get inside the gate, the main
Just
gate.
to be clear, it never was have to have a reservation for a court. Half of the courts were available publicly all along.
Right.
So I don't know what their mechanism is if you wanted to continue to make a paid reservation for a court. They're working on a revised operation plan that they should be getting me for 2023 as well as 2024.
Well, it would be a moot point to even go to their site because once you get into the gate, which there's a PIN number that tells you get in, all 12 courts are accessible now because there's nothing locking those.
Right, but as we've discussed previously, it's very similar to shelters. You can take a first-come, first-served approach, but there still may be value to some people to know they have a reservation. And so I'm not going to say that there won't be a reservation approach still, but the agreement all along is not all courts are subject to reservation.
Right, and I understand that. But like I said, that was before they had evidently PIN codes on each court. To be able to, you had to have that PIN number. Once you got in the main PIN gate, you had to have another PIN number to be able to get on to court number 1, 2, 3, or 4, or 5. And those devices are gone now and I could tell every pole is damaged. In other words, from where they were put on, I think they had to gouge into the poles to be able to get the arms to work up. Basically, and now that they're removed, then your black coating is now gone on the fence, and it's just metal.
Yeah,
gouged out. So.
I'd need to talk to you about that offline. I'd have to get more details.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
Just a follow-up question. If, let's say, Kansas Wesleyan's tennis team is going out for practice, is there a place where it's publicly posted, that so many courts have been reserved this morning from, let's just say, 7:30 to 9:30, so the public would know?
I believe that's the intent on behalf of Salina Tennis Alliance. I know with transition in staffing, I'm not sure how their website's being maintained, but that is the intent, whether it's posting physically at the location or on their website.
Okay.
Okay, any other comments or questions from the public? Okay, if not, I will bring it back to the commission for adjournment.
Move to adjourn.
Okay, got a motion, second to adjourn. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? We will see everyone back here next week.